Marks podcast. My name is Elizabeth Savillon, and welcome to another episode of this podcast. We talk about all things healing, embracing your story, and cultivating community here. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. All of that helps us to grow this podcast as well as to get the word out there and help other people with educational content as well as things that can encourage them. I am here at Hi Hello Labs in downtown Orlando in this beautiful studio space. And if you need any production, event space, or any content needs, make sure to reach out to them as well. And if you are in the Orlando area and you are a woman and want to make friends, make sure to check out our She Cultivates ORL community, which is all of us pretty much doing different events every month to bring women together, to make friends in adulthood. And we have a special event coming up in April, which is on April 20th, which is called Cultivating Within. And we're going to do a yoga expert panel series, as well as have vendors, acai bowls, and just a time to connect and talk about body positivity, the way that we see ourselves, as well as how we hold stress within our body. And so I am excited for that. And it's going to be April 20th, where you can buy your tickets at shecultivatesorl.com. On today's episode, I will be talking about trauma bonds. And as I have been kind of like getting content for a writing project I'm doing, I kind of stumbled across this. And I want to just do like a trigger warning for the topic of like just emotional abuse, all those kinds of things, as well as to let you know I am not a therapist and this is just my own perspective. And I definitely think that if you are in one of these situations, then there's definitely resources and things that can help you. And also I will put all the information of different episodes that I've done with an actual therapist that cover this topic. But on this topic, I wanted to talk about it because as I was going through my notes of just kind of things that I've wrote over the years, I remember I wrote this note. It was July 12th, 2021. So it was like 3 years ago. And when I wrote it, why I wrote it is because I was having a conversation with my sister. And she was telling me, she's like, Liz, like, I don't understand why you go back. Like, I don't understand why you just don't like get over it, like, and let it go. And I remember telling her, like, Steph, you just don't get it. Like, you just don't get it. You are not in the position. Like, it's a different kind of relationship that I don't know how to explain to you that it's not just like, all right, just let it go, just move on. Like basic breakup advice. I was in a trauma bond, and I remember I wrote it down and I was like, what does a trauma bond feel like when you're going through it? Because I was like, I've never heard someone share like how it is. Like, and it was like, I was going through the breakup. I was going through like the breaking off process during that time. And I didn't do it perfect. I made a lot of mistakes during that time because I didn't understand what was happening of like, it wasn't just that you're going through a breakup. I was going through a breakup with a narcissist. And when you go through that, it is very different. And in the past, I have shared about like, being in a toxic, unhealthy relationship, but it was definitely very different. And if you go back to other episodes that I've done, it is different than a regular breakup, toxic relationship, and narcissistic abuse relationship. And because I never was physically abused and I was never just like these kind of ideas of what I thought abuse looked like, I never said it. And I never told myself that it was actual emotional abuse that I was going through until years later. And so now that I feel like I have just really embraced my story and have fully gone through the process of being like, all right, so let me call it for what it was and what it is. And so I was in a trauma bond cycle for years with a narcissist, and it was so hard to get out of because every time I would get out or break up, right, because it was an on and off relationship, I would go back. And I never understood that it was like an addiction cycle. And that's what I will be talking about today. And it is something not to shame the person that I was in a relationship with. This is just to help and inform someone that I know that maybe you're in that position. But I felt so much shame because I always felt, I remember when I first got out of my relationship, I was like, I would tell myself all the time, I'd be like, oh, this happened to me because I'm super insecure. I have low confidence. I don't like have anything going for me. Like we used to be the one to say and believe that you have to be weak to get in these kind of relationships. And I just want to tell you that that's not it. Anyone can fall for a relationship like this because a narcissist is charismatic. They know what to say. They're good at, especially in the beginning, to like kind of loop you in. And you have such good and bad moments, right? Like a mix of both, that it's like you're kind of always expecting it to turn around or for them to maybe change or want to. So that was kind of my thought process during those years. And I remember that I feel like I became a different person to be able to like survive through that relationship. I became a person that didn't have needs, that didn't share what I really was feeling or going through. I was walking on eggshells. I felt very like I have to be on their good side or catch them on a good day because they're not going to talk to me if I bring up another problem or I start complaining about stuff, or like they're not that safe person for me to share. So I would just like, all right, when I'm with them, I have to act a certain way, and everything else I have to hide behind. And if I want to read exactly what a trauma bond is, just so you understand from like a psychology definition. A trauma bond is a connection between an abusive person and the individual that they abuse. It is reflective of an attachment created by repeating physical or emotional trauma with positive reinforcement. It can be hard to spot and even harder to break free from. Dr. Romani, which she is who I would call like my psychologist online. So she talks a lot about narcissistic abuse. And when I first got out of my relationship, or even a little bit before, I was starting to look up stuff online because I was like, this is not normal. Like, am I in a toxic relationship? What is happening? Like, I was just hearing these like words. And so I started looking up on YouTube, and that's how I found Dr. Romani, which I then went into a whole rabbit hole of narcissistic relationships and personality disorders, and just like how that looks like, what your relationship is, what is gaslighting, what is a trauma bond, what is hoovering, what is all these words that I never like heard of. And as I was looking and watching her videos, I would be like, oh my God, that's what's happening. Like, that's exactly what I'm going through. And during that time also I was in therapy. So it was like all of that together started, like, I felt like my eyes were like opening to like, this is what I'm really living through. And so Dr. Romani would explain trauma bond kind of like how when you go to the lottery or when you go to the casino, when you go to a slot machine, right? And you pull the lever and you're like, and you know, maybe you win $1 the first time and you're like, okay, I won $1. What if I put more? Will I get more? And it's like, you're kind of like in this positive, like hopeful reinforcement, because you also maybe see people around you that have won at the slot machine or that have gotten $100 or $5,000, and you're like, it's possible for me, you know? Or maybe sometimes you win, like maybe sometimes you actually make money and that keeps you there. And then sometimes you lose, but then you're like, but I remember that one time that I won $500, like what if I just continue, you know? And so that's why it becomes addictive, because you have high highs and low lows, and they're never consistent. So you're always just like, well, okay, we had a bad day, but then maybe tomorrow you have a great day. Maybe they buy you flowers, or they take you out, or they tell you that they love you, or tell you how amazing you are. And those are like little breadcrumbs that are feeding kind of like that hope. And over time, that hope in those relationships ends up making you sick, because you're hoping in the wrong person, because that person is not going to change. But when you're in it, you feel like because there are good moments, you kind of hold on to those good moments, even though there are a lot of bad moments. And when I wrote this down, I have like notes of like years, like I'm talking about like 2017, because I got into this relationship in 2014. And I was very young. I was like 17 going to 18, and I felt like there were certain signals that now I can see that were like the red flags that were always there, but I just didn't want to believe them. And I didn't want to and I don't think I knew that they were red flags because it felt so great, like going to the nicest places, having great memories, getting told that they want to marry me like within months. But then at the same time, starting picking at like my past or things that I've experienced or who I was, that they wished I was someone else or that I was like someone else. And so it was like those back and forth of like, oh, this future that I'm going to have with you, but also like, if you were just different, like you're not good enough. Like without saying that, you're not good enough, but without saying that, you're telling me that I'm not good enough. And I felt like it was like the back and forth that kept me for so many years, especially kind of blinded to the idea like this person would not do that. Like, no, that's not. And I didn't even know what a narcissist was at that point or anything like that. But in July 12th, 2021, I wrote this down. And so I wanted to explain what that feels like or what that looks like. The first thing I wrote was a trauma bond is knowing this relationship is bad for you, but still wanting to hear from them or see them to see if things have changed. You end up saying sorry for things they did because you don't want to lose or fight with this person. You have a longing or attachment to them. You take bare minimum and you forget what has happened in the past because they act so in love with you in the moment and they want you back, but then they don't want you anymore. It's like an addiction, just one hit and it calms your anxiety when you hear from them, see them or know about them. You have a great good time with them. Maybe that's a 7-hour conversation to try to fix things, excessive communication or flattering dates and meals. And that is followed by getting attached and then they become distant. They don't make plans with you for weeks. They don't want to talk to you on the phone. They barely communicate. They ignore you only when it's convenient for them, when they're either bored or they had a hard day or they're lonely or they want something, before they discard you again, which then they go MIA and they tell you they don't want you, that you're always causing a problem, that it's just not going to work out and it's too much. Then the cycle starts again. Your brain is used to the dopamine and oxytocin, serotonin, that you're always on high alert. I feel like I'm always on fight or flight mode. My heart rate is always going fast, even when I'm sitting down. When I would go back, I remember feeling like so much shame because I'm like, confusion. Like I kind of felt like I would go crazy because it was like, okay, we were good and then things were bad. And there would be problems that come up and then they would be like, oh, well, actually, no, I don't want to be in a relationship with you anymore. Actually, maybe I don't believe in marriage anymore. Or I don't think this is going to work out with you. Or like, you're asking for too much. Or like, I don't know why you just don't want to just like go with the flow. Like, I feel like you're always trying to like make things happen. And I feel like I remember being like, I just feel like this feels so off. Like I knew that it was off because over the years it changed. And as I kept going back, it would just get worse. So in the beginning, it was like, you know what? Like we broke up one time and like we were together for like a few years and then we broke up for the first time. After that first time, it was kind of like a quote unquote not being together for 3 months. But during that time, that person was talking to someone else and they had kind of quickly moved on and entertained by someone else. And then when that didn't work out or they were done with that, then they came back. And when they came back, they were like, oh my God, no, like you're the person, like now I know what I want, like, you know, but they denied all of what happened during that time, that they were, you know, why they weren't going after me was because they were entertained with someone else, you know? And there were so many moments that throughout like the breakups that I always felt like I was like fighting with like an invisible person, like of someone of their attention. And I'm like, but there was like no proof. So I would be like, Lord, like give me like a sign, like show me, like give me a sign or let me catch them in something to then like prove to myself that like I need to cut it off, or like there's something else. But it was a lot of like not communicating, going like MIA, like, or would get in a fight and it was like, well, I need more time. Like I need some time. And then they're like MIA the whole weekend. And it's like, what were you doing this whole weekend? And like the anxiety of feeling like, I don't know what you're doing, but at the same time, I know that you've done things in the past. And I just felt like there were so many clear signs that I needed to get out of this relationship, but I was just trying to convince myself that like one more thing to prove to myself that this wasn't good for me. But then when I would go back and we would break up, and I would feel so like I would start beating myself up because I was like, you did it again. You're literally in the same exact place as before. And I felt like I started betraying myself because I was like, you're not going to go back. You're not going to do anything. You're going to like stand firm. And it's like somehow in a conversation with this person, they would convince me that we're fine, that there was no problem, or like, actually, no, this time is going to be so different, even though I'm not going to change anything, or I'm going to change it, but I'm only going to change it for 3 weeks to a month. And then I'm going to go back to exactly who I was. And I felt like because I was betraying myself, I lost trust in like myself, my gut, like what my gut would be telling me, like, no, Liz, he's lying. Like, that's not true. And when I would talk to them, they would convince me that I was going crazy. They would convince me that I was making stuff up in my head, that I was just insecure because of my past relationships. And I was just putting 2 and 2 where 2 didn't fit. And like being delusional. Like, even though I had so many things that would equal, like, no, the math isn't mathing. But I allowed them to like start making me even believe that my gut of what I knew was true was false. And that's what happens when you are with a narcissist, is that they start playing like mind games, or they start talking a whole bunch of nothing. Like, it would be like rambling for hours of trying to convince me that what I was going to do or the decision I was going to make was wrong. And so that after so many years of that, you start getting like, I would say like trained, like you honestly start becoming who they want you to be because you're trying to survive the relationship. Like, you're trying to like be in it because you believe deep down that that's like what you deserve and the kind of relationship that you have. So you're like, well, I've been in this relationship for 7 years. Like, at this point, like, I want us to work. Like, I don't want to lose this. And there's a lot of fear of abandonment, a lot of fear of just like your self-esteem is low. You don't believe that you're gonna find someone else. You don't believe, like, it's like you can only see there. I remember like I was so like you know how like a horse is, that they're just like stuck. They have like the things here that they're just like stuck. Like, that's all I could see. I cannot see anything else. Like, I couldn't even see the sunny day outside. Like, my energy and my soul, my existence, I feel like was about this person. Like, my whole identity and energy was consumed with that. And I was just talking to a friend this week about that we're like, wow, do you remember when relationships used to consume our whole life? Like, that's all the energy went there. All the energy was if they talked to you, if they made plans with you, if they liked you, if they were going to, call you today, if they wanted to talk to you, if you were going to get them mad, if they were cheating on you, if they're hanging out with this girl, like, just all of that, just feeling so much anxiety all the time. Like, that's where my mind was. Like, while I was like, I can recall so many moments in my life throughout those years that I was like doing stuff, but I was like not there because I was like worried about them. Like, even there was a moment that I just felt like so much, like how I said, it's like what keeps you in it. It's like because it's a cycle that's like addictive, because you get some positive reinforcement, and that positive reinforcement is like what holds you, which is like the little like ounces of like love, you know? And so I shared on my social media a few weeks ago of begging for scraps of love. I feel like that was me. Like any ounce of affirmation or of validation I wanted that so bad from this person. And I think back to like the arguments I got in front of other people, which is so embarrassing. Like I remember one time it was like a New Year's Eve. Another time it was like in front of like family. Like there's so many times that I'm like, that was so embarrassing. Like if you knew me during those years, like I'm sorry. I've said sorry to my family, to friends, to people that have known me during that time because I became a completely different person. Like this relationship took so much more than it gave. And in the time, because I believed this like fairy tale of like, you know, I am a good person and he should see the goodness of me and I wouldn't do those things to him. And like, I've been here and like, I've helped him in so many ways. And like, I want him to realize that and like to pick me, choose me. Like, that's what I wanted, is like to be chosen by him, even though I was in a relationship with him. And the trauma bond was a vicious cycle because not only was it the feelings that you feel when you're in it, but then when you're not in it, it's withdrawals. And so I wrote about the withdrawals. It was like you go through withdrawals of this person. You feel sad, pain in your chest, anxiety, fatigue, headaches. You don't want to eat or you eat too much. You can't sleep or you sleep too much. And just when you feel like you're getting better, you're crying less, you're laughing more, they come back. It's like they sense you're moving on or doing okay without them. And that part of when you're in it, right? It's a whole cycle within itself. When you're in it, you feel so anxious. You feel like you're trying to hold on to a relationship. But then when you guys break up or you have a fight or you're not together, right? Then you have that space. And I've shared this before of like the cycle. So we were like in this cycle of like a month or like a month and 2 weeks, or where it's like he would always come back or I would do something in the beginning that would like start kind of like that cycle again. So in the beginning it was like both of us were like in this like, hey, reaching out, like checking in, you know, and then towards the later years, that once it started getting worse, then we would break up like more often. Then it would be like, I would be like, all right, I'm done. Like I'm moving on. And eventually I got to that place of like, okay, we're not going to work out. Like clearly, like this is not it. But then literally as I was like getting better, it's like he would pop around and he'd be like, you know, I'm ready. I want to get married. I was looking at rings. That was it. Like, honestly, that was like the carrot that was dangling over my head for like especially the end years, was about like knowing what I want and desire, which I wanted to get married. I wanted to have a house and like, I wanted to have this whole life, right? Because I had been with this person for so many years. And I remember like around, especially like after I got out of my apartment, I ended up going back home. We broke up and like my plan was, you know, maybe by that time we would get engaged or like something would happen after that. That didn't happen. We broke up and I ended up moving back in with my parents. And that was such a hard time because it was like my whole life was like shattering. And it was like my reality of what I thought it was going to be like was not going to be that way. And during that time, though, what he used to try to get to me was, you know, like now I want to get married. Like now I want to, you know, have this whole like family with you, like have this whole life. You know, he even would tell people like at work, like, oh yeah, like for his sales pitch, like about being engaged to me. And just playing off of what I wanted and desired. And that was so hard because I'm like, well, maybe he does want those things then. But that wasn't true. Every time we were back together again, it would be the same thing over and over of like, no, this is not what I want. And his actions would show completely different. So I felt like I had to let go of that fake reality of what he was promising me, because I was always trying to like justify or like be like, like maybe it's because he's working really hard. He's like saving for us, and or like, he's going through a hard day. Like it's like I would justify so much, to the point that that's what kept me for such a long time too, is the justification, seeing him as like, oh, he has a bad past too, and he's gone through the hard things, and like that kept me in that loop for so long, because I wanted to believe the good, and I wanted to believe that like, you wouldn't intentionally hurt me, right? Like you wouldn't. Like if I'm telling you that I'm hurting, you wouldn't do it either way. But it's like some people will do that. And that's the hard reality. Like I feel like I had to take away the fluffy clouds and all of that, of believing that someone was genuinely intentionally doing certain things, and they didn't care how I felt, because they saw me as like, she will always be there. When I'm ready, she'll be there. When I want her, like I'll go back. But when I don't want her, I don't want her. So I was like a yo-yo. Like I literally felt like I was like on a yo-yo and a roller coaster of my life during those years. I remember I wrote something as well of like, I felt like in the relationship, I was like on a, like you're on a boat with someone, like you guys are heading a direction. I felt like he jumped out of the boat and I was like going still. And I'm like, but then he would like fight his way back to the boat. And then it would be like, okay. Like it was like this like inconsistent whirlwind, because I feel like to be in it, it's a roller coaster, but it's because of the highs and lows, and because of the good moments, and because of those like tears that, they might share, those heartful moments, those heart-to-heart moments that you're like, wow, you're human, you actually do care. But then after they would do something that's like, oh, no, it's only because that benefited you at that moment. And so I had to go through a lot of different stages to finally get like enough is enough. So when I shared about being in a toxic relationship, the episode, and when I've done the one of like heartbreak and the advice of like pros and cons of breakup advice and things like that, I feel like I had to finally get to the place where I said I'm done. And that took me, we broke up, and it took me like a year, 2 years maybe, even after. And even the first year of the podcast, I didn't talk about it, because I'm like, I'm still in this cycle. Like I'm still, answering the calls, and I'm still like meeting up, and I'm still like just not like like I was self-sabotaging. I was literally not valuing myself. I was hoping that it was going to work, and it was not. Like this person has shown me so many times that they don't value, that they don't see, that they weren't going to change. But I was like hoping, and like I never want, like even in my podcast, I'm never going to like bash someone of like exactly the things, but I have many stories and receipts of stuff. And I always felt like if one more thing can happen to show me, like, then I would be done. Like that was always my thing. I remember I was like, I just want to catch him like in the moment, like in the act. Like I want to catch him with this person that I think he's dating, or like this person, like I just wanted to catch him. But all the things that this person was already doing to me were enough. They weren't respecting my boundaries. They would go MIA or silent treatment me. They wouldn't respect me when they were mad. Like so many things that they would do to prove to me. They would manipulate. They would just like tell me, they would like breadcrumb me or like bait and switch. Like all these things that would happen at the cost of my emotional safety and my emotional well-being, because it was convenient for them. And even when I cut it off, and even when I was like, nope, like they didn't believe me, and they still continued, and they're like, no, now I want to change now, and that was hard, because I was like, I had to shut off that part of me to empathize and justify. I had to be like, no, what are the facts show? The facts show that you've done this so many times, and you're going to do it again to me. And every time I would go back, the same thing would happen. And I know that when I got out of it, I had to make a decision to not go back every single day. And I was like, even when I would have bad days or bad dates or like, and then this person's like there and you're like, no, I've been there, done that. Like, I know how that's going to end. But I also like, I'm not the same person that I was in that relationship now. Like, this person has no idea who I am today because I'm a completely different person. Because when I got out of that relationship, my confidence level was like so low. I was so low. I didn't feel okay with myself. And I had to rebuild that. I had to start out my life completely over. And when we broke up, I was 25. I had just turned 25. And that was always my goal. It was like to be married by 25 and to have this whole happily ever after. And so when we ended and I had to start like rebuilding my life and like find myself and like find my voice, find my hobbies, like my friends, it was like I had to find a new like circle and environment. I felt like that was like recreating my life again. And so when I would want to go back, I would be like, Liz, at what cost? Like, what cost is it going to be to go back to that? Like, how it's been. You know how anxious you were. You know how like just angry you were, how like low you were about yourself, about life. Like, you were begging someone that clearly couldn't give you what you deserved and what you wanted. And I feel like how I broke my trauma bond was blocking, grieving, and going through the process to heal, to not look back. I had to end contact, and that took me a long time because I didn't want to be like the villain. Like, I didn't want to be like the one that was like dramatic, and I probably am that person to them. I was dramatic, or like me talking about it. But I didn't have a voice all those years. I didn't tell people what I was going through, and I didn't even know what I was going through. Like, I felt like at the time it was like, well, at least it's not this bad, at least it's not this bad. But until I started saying like, oh no, this person emotionally abused me. This person manipulated me and would gaslight me and made me feel crazy when I wasn't. It was like, you were doing all these things, but you didn't want to seem like the bad person. So then you blamed it on me, that I was the insecure, jealous girl, when it's like, I had all the reasons to feel that way because of the actions that were done. So if you are in those situations, I just want to validate that what you're going through, your gut is telling you the truth. You're not making stuff up. Of course, does our trauma and things that we've been through show up in relationships? Yes. But I remember blaming that for myself so much. I was like, well, it's probably because I went through child abuse, and it's probably because I'm insecure because I was cheated on in my relationships, and it's probably because of this. No, it was because of those things that happened, I was actually maybe even more capable of being in one of these relationships, because that's what I had known. I had known chaos. And so that's why I'm in this relationship and I'm tolerating, and I don't see it. Like, I don't sense it, versus someone maybe that feels it out like the first few dates and like the first, and when they show them their real self, they're like, oh no, absolutely not. I felt like I didn't have my voice, and I didn't know how to set those boundaries, and I didn't know how to say like, actually, this feels off, or like, no, you're not going to treat me like that. And so all of that was me starting to educate myself on these dynamics, what was happening, what was really happening, which at the time sounded like, oh my God, how can I say that was emotional abuse? But that was. And all the things that I've been through, even post breakup, because the post breakup abuse is intense. It's the constant calling and texting and emailing and trying to talk to you, to tell you, and having other people call for them and being like their triangulation of things, or like them just doing stuff to try to like get back to you, or to get back to you about them. And it's like all just there. And you're trying to move forward with your life because you know that that's not where you should be. And that decision is literally daily. And that decision is like, I know that I don't deserve that. I know that what I've been through, and like validating and giving that voice to be like, wow, I went through that. And you guys have seen on this podcast that I have shared a lot of areas of my life. But the one of relationships, especially with this person, has been the hardest part, because I didn't want to seem like if I'm being mean or like talking bad about them. And it's like, that's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying the truth. I'm just speaking out of the experience that I had, which this person can say maybe things about me, because I wasn't perfect and I had my flaws, but I've talked about them all on this podcast. I've talked about all the areas that I have also played in my own suffering and my own pain, because I did with what I knew. And so I had to create kind of like plans, and like I had to create kind of like barriers to protect myself from going back, of like telling people, of having plans on those lonely days, on like changing my areas that I hung out because I didn't want to run into this person at the time, and just putting my energy into other things. And I think that one of the most important things was prayer through breaking of the soul tie. I think I was in a soul tie, especially when you're in a trauma bond, in just an unhealthy dynamic that you feel like you've lost yourself, your whole world is consumed by them. Like you kind of idolize this person. I feel like that is, you have to pray through that and fast and really like ask God to help you through that, because you cannot do that alone. I felt like I would dream about them, think about them everywhere that I went. And a part of that is a normal breakup. Like you will think about them and they will be a part of the grieving. But especially when it's years past, I feel like I had to finally like make a decision and pray and like fast and really be like, God, take whatever's in, like that's still linking me to this person in some way, like take that away. And so I feel like that helped me a lot too, because I felt like it was like my soul was like attached to this person, and it was like a ripping of that. And when you rip something that has been put together in an unhealthy way, like you still have pieces that are then them of you and then you of them. Like I feel like that's not what God intended, and that's not what was intended. But those are kind of like what I would say, like the consequences of certain decisions that I know that I made, and I had to work through that and I had to heal through that, because it would still linger, you know? And so I had to break that through prayer, but also through actions that I took to separate that, because I just felt like there was so much like that was still there. And so all that to say is that the difference between like a trauma bond and like a regular connection is more of the addiction and enabling and rescuing that you try to do within the relationship. It's a lot of fear of abandonment and betrayal of self, because you want to be chosen by this person. It's really about an emotional addiction that you feel like it's love, but it's really like a using of you, but you don't see it as that way because you genuinely believe that that's what love is. And so you become a person. Who I became out of that relationship was someone that I remember asking myself, like, maybe I'm the narcissist. Like, am I a narcissist? Like, am I someone that is like using, because you're kind of like using the way that they act to kind of like mirror them, to kind of like work with the relationship dynamics that they have. But you also know that that's not healthy. So, and I remember my therapist was like, well, narcissists usually don't ask if they're a narcissist, and they don't usually get help, especially for prolonged help. And if anything, they do it more for like social, how that's going to look socially. But an authentic connection feels like evolving together, partners who work to create safety with each other. They honor their own needs, limits, and each other's boundaries and needs. They're curious, acceptance, and ability to hold space with one another. And they have a place of security and peaceful that can sometimes feel boring. And I think that is a huge difference between when you're in a narcissistic trauma bond, is because it feels like a fairy tale a lot of the time. And it feels like an excessive high that you have when you're in those relationships versus what a healthy connection that is like steady and normal and boring. And even my therapist has told me, and I you guys have probably heard the episode of like, Liz, you're probably going to not feel the butterflies and sparks, because the butterflies and sparks are anxiety that's telling you something. And when I think about when I have felt those things, it usually was with not the healthiest kind of guys. And so I've learned a lot in these past few years, and I feel like I've been vulnerable and open with you guys about certain things that I've walked through, and it's taken me years. I have been single now for like 3 years. I think it's been 3 years now. And I think I've used this time to really like work on myself, the issues that I have had, and also forgive myself, because a huge part of when you get out of narcissistic abusive relationships is that you feel such a sense of shame and guilt, and just like you just don't feel happy with yourself, because you're like, why did I allow this? Like, if my friend told me that they were going through this, I would tell them to get out, but I stayed. Like, they did X, Y, and Z, and I stayed. They told me that I deserved better, and that they wanted to be better for me, that I deserved better, and I still stayed. And they kept coming back and did the same thing, and I would continuously accept that. And I was trying to like save that unhealed version of me. Like, I was trying to save and change the story narrative for myself. Like, I wanted to prove to this person that I was lovable and enough. And so it has taken years, and I even looked it up, like, how long does it take to heal from, and it's usually like 3 to 5 years. So it takes some time. And I feel like that's why I don't believe in the time heals all wounds. I feel like time creates the space, but we have to be intentional with what we do in that time. So in the beginning, I felt like I had to be so angry about it to get out of it. And then I had to, like, I felt like the feeling of hate, to be honest. I literally felt so much anger. And then I had to go through the grief. And then I felt a lot of sadness and pain. And now I talk about it very differently because of the forgiveness that I had to do with myself, with that person. I do not wish anything bad towards that person. I wish them the best. I hope that they achieve and grow and heal through their own journey, because I know that it was a lot of dysfunction in both. But I also know that that person wasn't safe for me, and I will not allow that person back into my life ever. And I don't ever want to mirror or date someone like that I become who I became during that time. So I know that I had a lot of things that I could have done differently, but also I feel like that just was a narcissistic abusive relationship. And I honestly couldn't have done or been more perfect for them to want and choose me. And I've accepted that. Like, at the end of the day, I changed so many things about myself, and tried so many ways and gave so many chances. And it was never going to be enough for this person with me. And so letting that go and being like, it is what it is, you know? And the beauty that has come from that for myself. I want to do another episode of that on another day, of like the beauty of starting over, because I feel like we hear a lot of like what happens in the relationship, but we never hear of like actually, but once you get out and you actually stay out of those kind of relationships, what are the possibilities and the kind of beautiful things that come out of it? And so, yeah, so that was the episode for today. I know it was a little long and maybe share, like, I'm like, okay, did I ramble? I don't know, maybe, but I hope that you guys hear my heart of knowing that if you are in one of those dynamics, you can get out. It is possible that you're not crazy. It is possible that you're just with a narcissist that is keeping you in a trauma bond and you're so used to it that that's your normal. But I want to tell you that that is not normal, and you need to figure out to educate yourself, find a therapist, find a community of people, because you cannot do it alone. It takes so much for you to get out and stay out. And they say that especially with any emotional, physical, domestic violence, abuse, it sometimes takes 7 or more times to get out. And it took me years. When I think about what my Roman Empire is, that I think about is that it took me 8 years. It took me 8 years to finally say, I'm done. And I have to have a lot of compassion for that person, because I felt so much like, wow, they took like my best years. And now I don't believe that. I think my best years are yet to come. And so I want to encourage you that you can create a beautiful life no matter what you have been through, educating yourself, being empowered by your story, and not being ashamed. Once you talk about it more, you will feel like, wow, like that really happened. And I went through that. And I am so not that person anymore, because me and my friends literally laugh at, like, sometimes we're like, we did what? We allowed what? Like, oh my God, we went to their house? What? Like, that's a whole nother episode. That is not the kind of podcast I do, but I have plenty of stories of stuff that I wish that I could just stop myself, because I felt like the lowest of lows. Like, I didn't respect myself. And so, but we learn, we live and we learn. And those are all things to make us, better, and things that we can not repeat. So if this encouraged you, make sure to send this to a friend, as well as you can write me on social media and let me know your thoughts. If you need to chat about maybe your own trauma bond or things that you're experiencing, I would love to talk with you, or just maybe give you some referrals of a therapist if you are in that position, as well as having compassion with yourself if you are in one of those relationships, as well as the other side, which I will add on the bottom in the show notes, of if your friend is in a relationship like this. It is so hard to watch, and I have had the best community and friends that have walked through me going back and forth a million times, but I couldn't have done it without their prayers, their support, their accountability. And I know it's possible for your friend too. So make sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and I will see you guys next week.